Hello, I'm Elijah Rose, the soldier turned historian, and the topic for this video is the legendary origins of the Arab people. The second part being the available DNA evidence. The DNA evidence is of limited quality and quantity, and with limited ability to tell us about what happened in the distant past. For instance, the DNA samples collected are mostly from blood banks and/or Arabs living abroad. Therefore, the results are overweight rich Arabs and those Arabs living in the handful of cities that actually have qualified hospital staff to manage blood banks. This isn't too much of an issue because we know for a fact that local and poor people and rural people tend to have more localized hereditary than the city people or the rich. The other issue is the thousands of years that separate the original Arabs from the Arabs of today is so far away, it's hard to say anything certain beyond how much of a certain population roughly descends from the people who we have bones for in archaeology. Mixed hereditary often can't be ascribed to a specific era or migration. But again, this is also not too much of an issue since we usually have fragmentary evidence of migration written in archaeological records. Also note these studies are all done on local populations, standing citizens that have most or all of their families within the countries in question. This is important because in many of these countries, as much as three-fourths of the population are nomadic in one form or another. There are temporary expat workers, various industries ranging from kafala slaves to Bedouins from the next state over to imported skilled workers from developed nations, and of course, sailors docking in the ports. The people who own the land are the ones that count for this study because these tend to be highly localized people, and their genetics will often do reflect where the country in question comes from. What the genetic evidence does tell us is very interesting. Approximately 85% of Saudi Arabia's DNA is from the first known residents of very specifically the Hejaz region in the western part of that country. And I mean 85% of their ancestors were these Bronze Age people. And about two-thirds of the population has at least a little Levantine ancestry, which will be important in a future episode. Approximately 80% of Yemen's ancestry is also from the early Hijaz, with much of the remaining 20% being from the Horn of Africa. But it should be noted, Yemen has a lot of local ethnic oddities because the isolation of its mountains hide, local divisions that roughly correspond to the tribes of that area. I have found no complete study for the DNA origins of the United Arab Emirates, but the studies I've seen show that there are also local ethnic divisions that also roughly follow tribal lines, and all the subjects of their study showed high rates of endogamy and homozygosity, which is biologist jargon for they are as inbred as all hell. Same story for Oman, which again, I haven't seen any detailed study on their origins, other than say their position on the trade routes. They have a lot of trace DNA from as far away as Egypt and China due to imports, and they also have a very concerning amount of birth defects and genetic disorders. On a similar note, the study I saw for Qatar, the country, worked with the preconceived notion that the Arabs were from the Levant. This is ultimately true, but their reasoning was false because many geneticists assumed humans moved out of Africa overland following the Fertile Crescent. And we will see in this video series that that does not appear to be the case. However, men from Cornell University did sequence the DNA for 6,218 Qatari men who all donated blood and found they have an extremely remote Levantine ancestry, and they are all very well inbred, with subjects showing 20% to 50% all shared parental DNA. Compare that to less than 1/10 of a percent in most developed countries. This study actually ascribed this trend totally to local culture and not the availability of unrelated persons to marry. And our final example is Kuwait, which is found to be of mixed Persian and Arab origins. That's not very surprising given its geographic position, but you also must note that Kuwait City did not exist until it became an oil state very recently, and this area spent most of its history as a tribal region with no significant city at all, and it's a place migrants from both sides just collected over the years. And again, the effects of long-term inbreeding has become a scientific fact with these studies. Now, I am not a geneticist, but I would say to anybody involved in DNA research that there is much work to be done in the DNA of the Arab Peninsula, especially with the truly nomadic rural area in this area that to this day are not even counted on the census. Now, you might think these are homeless people that could end up anywhere, but homeless people tend to stay in one general area for most of their lives, and the Bedouin are not the exception. I would also ask that any and all available data sets be compared to specifically the Bronze Age bones from the northern Hijaz region. I doubt these new DNA studies will uncover anything not already known to a few, but it will make it an irrefutable scientific fact, and you may learn something you end up regretting knowing. It should not surprise any of the viewers that the Arabs are Arabs.